A samurai gave his last bowl of rice to a stranger. By midnight, men with blades were already moving in the forest around his village. What began as an act of mercy would draw blood before dawn. The man's name was Haruji, a soldier grown old in the Sengoku Wars who now tilled earth among farmers. That evening, he returned from gathering wood when he saw a figure collapsed at the shrine gate. The traveler's clothes were torn, dust ground deep into the weave, and a cord hung at his throat like a charm stripped of power. His eyes carried both hunger and secrets. Haruji did not ask. He lifted the man into his hut, set the kettle on the coals, and scraped together the last rice from his store. It was not much, one small chawan meant for his own supper. Still, he steamed it, placed it before the stranger, and laid down a pair of hashi. The traveler bowed low, yet when he ate, Haruji noticed something strange. The man's hand never strayed far from the pouch hidden under his jacket, clutching it with the reflex of someone who carried not food but fate. Whatever was inside seemed heavier than the body that staggered into the village. "You share what you need yourself," the traveler said. "I share what hunger would steal," Haruji answered, pouring pine-scented tea. Outside, children's laughter thinned. Dogs barked once and fell silent. A crow screeched from the shrine beam and flew into the dark pines. The wind dropped away. Haruji felt the stillness in his spine, the same he had known on ridgelines before ambush, in courtyards before swords were drawn. He rose and slid the door aside. Beyond the paddies, the tree line shifted with shadows. Not one or two, but many, their movements stitched with the faint glow of torches cupped low. He could not yet count them, but the ground carried their weight. Dozens, perhaps 50. He shut the door again and lowered the bar. The wrapped blade in the corner seemed longer in the gloom, like memory itself leaning out of the past. He told himself he had buried that life. Yet the air already tasted of oil and iron, and the night had one breath left to give. The village of Takamine clung to the mountainside like a pocket of warmth sewn into the cold fabric of the Sengoku night. Smoke rose from low chimneys. The scent of millet porridge mixed with pine resin and lanterns of paper bloomed faintly along the lanes. At first glance, nothing marked this evening apart from any other, yet Haruji felt the change in the air as surely as he felt the ache in his bones. After the stranger had eaten his fill, the samurai walked him to the shrine. The man bowed low before the altar, lips moving in words Haruji could not hear. He still clutched that hidden pouch under his jacket, as though afraid even shadows might snatch it. Haruji lingered a step behind, arms folded, watching the flame of a lantern shiver in the wind. Elder Shun came then, his shoulders bent but his eyes bright with unease. "Few pass through Takamine in spring," he murmured. "Perhaps the gods have sent him." "Or perhaps they test us," Haruji answered. He looked up at the crow perched on the beam of the shrine. It ruffled its feathers, called once, and flew toward the pines. Omens belonged to priests, but soldiers knew them too. The evening deepened. Children played their last games, leaping over frozen ridges of earth, until mothers called them inside. The sound of laughter faded, replaced by the creak of doors sliding shut. Haruji walked the lanes, nodding to farmers who prepared their simple suppers. They still believed the night would pass as all others had. He envied them that belief. At the granary, Tanabe the steward paced with his abacus, checking and rechecking sacks of rice. His voice trembled with forced confidence. "The stores are safe. None will go hungry." Yet his eyes flicked again and again to the south path, and Haruji caught the sweat on his brow despite the chill. He said nothing, not yet. The traveler, he had given no name, remained at the shrine. From time to time, his hand tightened around the pouch, and his lips moved faster, prayers spilling like a river in flood. The villagers avoided him. No one wished to interrupt the supplications of a desperate man, yet all felt unease that his voice belonged to the night rather than to them. As dusk bled into true dark, Haruji called the men together. They had no castle walls, no drilled troops, only bamboo spears, pine resin torches, and the courage of farmers. He showed them how to stack crates at narrow lanes, how to leave gaps for retreat. He told them to keep the women and children close to the shrine, where its high platform might give some shelter. His words were calm, but every order carried the weight of years spent reading the battlefield. When the work was done, he sat before his hut with the sword across his knees. The blade was still sheathed, but the presence of it filled the night like an ember beneath ash. He drank tea that tasted faintly of iron and listened. The wind died. The dogs whined and pressed against doors. Then came silence so deep it hollowed the air. No crickets, no frogs, not even the whisper of the stream. It was the kind of silence soldiers feared most, the silence that meant another silence was listening back. Then a sound, the distant cry of a horse. Takamine owned no horses. Haruji rose, heart steady. He looked toward the tree line, and in the dim light of a hidden moon he saw it, a faint seam of fire weaving through the cedars, torches, many, too many. He counted the rhythm of feet against earth, the press of bodies through brush. Dozens at least. The longer he listened, the more certain he became. The village would not see morning unchallenged. He hurried to the shrine where Elder Shuen had gathered a handful of villagers already frightened by the horse's cry. The old man's voice shook as he pointed toward the ridge. "What moves there?" Haruji answered without hesitation. "Men. Not a band of thieves, not wanderers. Soldiers." A mother clutched her child tighter. Genji the woodcutter gripped his hatchet until his knuckles whitened. Yori, the weaver, stood with a bamboo spear across her chest, lips pressed into a line. The traveler turned slowly from the altar, eyes wide, face pale in the lantern light. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. Only his hand moved, to press again against that pouch, as though the object within were the true center of the storm rolling down the ridge. The first arrow whistled overhead and shattered a lantern. Darkness leapt into the gap, then another and another, until the shrine beams rattled with the impact of shafts. Children screamed, the villagers scattered for cover. And then, at last, the forest gave up its shadows. From the tree line poured men with wicker shields and black sashes, torches raised, oil gourds slung at their belts. They came not as a trickle, but as a flood, their cries shaking the night. Haruji did not need to count every face. The ground itself carried the measure of them. 50. The promise of mercy had become the weight of doom. The arrows had barely ceased when smoke began to curl over the shrine roof. Pine resin torches hissed as raiders thrust them into thatch, turning huts into sudden bonfires. The night that had promised only stillness now split open with screams. Haruji drove villagers toward the inner lanes. "Protect the shrine first. Hold the children close." His voice cut through the confusion with the sharpness of a drawn blade. Genji the woodcutter swung his hatchet wildly at the first man who broke through the lane, and by some miracle the blow struck true, dropping the raider into the dust. Blood spattered across Genji's chest. His eyes widened, not with triumph, but with the shock of survival bought by violence. Yori, clutching her bamboo spear, planted herself at the shrine steps. She thrust once, twice, and forced back another attacker. Her thin arms shook, but her jaw did not. Haruji saw her courage and knew it was not training that made a warrior, but necessity. Yet even as the villagers fought, something gnawed at him. The raiders moved with precision. They did not strike blindly at houses or scatter after plunder. Their push curved, always toward the shrine. And when one torchbearer glimpsed the traveler in the lantern light, his shout cut through the chaos. "There! There he is!" The words chilled Haruji more than the flames. They had not come merely for grain. They had come for the man he had fed. The traveler stumbled back into the shadows of the altar. Haruji cut down the soldier who had pointed him out, blade ringing, sparks flying as steel bit steel. He pressed forward, creating space for the villagers to fall back. When the clash eased for a moment, Haruji grabbed the man by the sleeve. "Tell me now, why did they hunt you?" The traveler's breath came fast, eyes flicking to the pouch hidden beneath his jacket. "I carry nothing worth your lives." "That lie will not shield these people." Haruji's grip tightened. Before he could demand more, another wave of raiders surged. He released the man and turned his blade to the fight. Still, the question gnawed at him with every cut. What could a single wanderer carry that would drive 50 armed men to risk fire and steel in the dead of night? Meanwhile, in the confusion, Haruji noticed something else. A lantern flaring on the south edge of the village, then dimming. A signal. But who among the villagers would mark the enemy's path? His eyes found Tanabe, the steward, hovering near the granary. The man's abacus was gone. In his hand gleamed the empty frame of a torch, resin still dripping. Suspicion rooted deep. Was it Tanabe who guided them? Had betrayal grown inside Takamine long before the stranger appeared? The raiders pressed harder. Haruji cut through another, the old blade singing with each stroke, but his mind tracked two battles now. The one against the men in front of him, and the one against the rot inside his own village. As the enemy regrouped, he pulled Genji and Yori close. "Hold them here. Protect the shrine at all costs." "What of you?" Yori asked, chest heaving. "I must find answers," he said, eyes narrowing toward the granary where Tanabe lingered. The clash resumed with greater fury, sparks raining, flames rising higher, but Haruji's gaze kept returning to the traveler, clutching his pouch, and the steward who watched the night with eyes too calm for a man under siege. Between the two, one carried a secret, and the other carried betrayal. And Haruji knew, before dawn he would be forced to choose which truth to cut open first. The flames spread faster than the villagers could douse them. Oil gourds burst against thatch. Huts that had taken years to build collapsed into fire within minutes. The smell of smoke and pitch choked the narrow lanes, and the cries of children pierced through the clash of steel. Yet amid the chaos, Haruji's voice cut steady and strong, gathering fear and forging it into resolve. "Pull back to the shrine," he commanded. "The fields are lost. Defend the heart." The villagers obeyed, dragging water buckets, dragging children, dragging even the wounded. Genji the woodcutter planted himself in a lane with his hatchet, refusing to move until Haruji himself pulled him by the shoulder. Yori, her face streaked with soot, led a line of women carrying jars of water to the shrine steps. Though their hands shook, they poured and stamped at every ember that landed near the sacred platform. The raiders pressed hard. Their captain, a tall man with a lacquered half-mask and a black sash scored by 3 slashes, barked orders that carried over the roar of flames. His troops did not scatter into greed. They kept their formation, shields raised, blades cutting with precision. This was no band of bandits. This was a trained force under command. And still, their path bent always toward the shrine. Haruji met their push with every ounce of skill the years had left him. His blade moved with economy, a rusted edge sharpened by memory. Each parry sent sparks flying. Each counterstroke carved space for another villager to fall back alive. His body ached, but his will stood unbent. Between clashes, his eyes sought Tanabe. The steward lingered near the granary, half hidden in the smoke. Twice Haruji saw him raise and lower a lantern, as if marking positions. When confronted by frightened villagers, Tanabe waved them off with words about protecting rice stores. But Haruji knew better. Every signal coincided with a fresh push from the enemy. Still, he could not accuse openly. Panic would tear Takamine apart faster than fire. For now, he locked the knowledge inside, storing it like a blade not yet drawn. The traveler remained near the shrine, shoulders hunched, hand pressed to his hidden pouch. Each time an arrow hissed past, he flinched but did not run. His silence shouted louder than any confession, And when one raider cried, "The courier lives! Take him whole!" Haruji's suspicions sharpened into certainty. The stranger carried something worth an army's night march. "Whatever it is," Haruji muttered under his breath, "it has chained us all." As the enemy regrouped, Haruji seized the moment to rally the defenders. He gathered them by the shrine steps, farmers with bamboo spears, mothers clutching torches, even children old enough to hold buckets of water. Their faces were pale with fear, yet in each he saw the ember of determination. "We cannot hold them in open ground," he told them, "but this village is ours. We know its lanes, its stones, its shadows. Every corner is a wall, every ditch a snare. Use what you have, strike and fall back. Survive the night." They nodded. Genji tightened his grip on the hatchet. Yori shifted her stance, spear braced. Elder Shuin lifted a cracked bell rope and whispered a prayer over them all. For a moment, the firelight on their faces looked like dawn instead of doom. The captain raised his arm and the raiders surged again. Shields locked, torches blazing, they advanced toward the shrine in a tide of black and orange. Haruji drew in a deep breath, feeling the weight of every soul behind him. The crow called once more from the ridge, its cry ragged and harsh. "Hold!" Haruji shouted. His blade flashed out, meeting the first shield. Sparks leapt. Genji roared and struck from the side, splitting wood with a blow that echoed like an axe in the forest. Yori thrust her spear into the gap, catching another raider in the thigh. The villagers fought not with grace, but with desperation sharpened into courage. Still the pressure mounted. Arrows clattered into the shrine posts. Torches rained against the roof. The enemy pressed closer, step by step, shield by shield. Haruji's arms burned with the weight of each strike, but his voice never faltered. "Push! Push them back!" And for a heartbeat, they did. The villagers surged as one, driving the attackers a few paces from the steps. Cheers broke ragged from their throats. For that moment, Takamine stood unbroken. But Haruji knew the night had only begun. He saw the captain's half-mask glint in the firelight, saw the black sash lift in the wind. Behind him, more raiders waited, rested and ready. The true test was still coming. He glanced once more toward the granary and saw Tanabe lower his lantern, its flame winking out in the smoke. Betrayal still stalked their rear. And in the shadow of the shrine, the traveler clutched his pouch, as though it burned his skin. The roar of the enemy swelled like a storm tide, and Takamine bent beneath it. The first clash had cost the raiders' men, but it had cost the villagers more. Breath, strength, and the illusion that they could withstand 50. Arrows rained in deadly rhythm. One struck the shrine's wooden post with a splintering crack. Another found the shoulder of a farmer beside Haruji. The man gasped, dropped his bamboo spear, and fell writhing on the steps. Blood poured dark against the pale wood. The defenders froze for an instant, long enough for fear to coil through their ranks. "Stand!" Haruji barked, voice like iron. "If you fall, the children fall with you." The words jolted them back into motion. Yori knelt by the wounded man, pressing cloth against the wound while her spear lay across her knees. Tears glistened on her cheeks, but her hands did not falter. Elder Shun murmured prayers even as his old fingers trembled over the man's brow. Genji roared like a beast and charged the nearest raider. His hatchet sank into a shield, splitting it wide, but the enemy's blade slashed his thigh. Genji staggered back, bleeding, yet refused to retreat. He planted himself before the shrine, legs braced, weapon lifted again. The raiders advanced in disciplined ranks. Captain Kanda's voice carried over the clash, cold and commanding. "Drive them to the shrine!" The courier must not escape Haruji's suspicions, hardened into certainty. This was no random raid for food. This was a mission. The stranger, the man he had fed, was the fulcrum upon which Takamine's fate now balanced. He turned his head and found Ichiro pressed against the shrine wall, hand locked around the pouch as if it were part of his flesh. His face was pale, his lips trembling. but he did not flee. Haruji's gaze lingered on him only a moment before a fresh charge demanded his blade. Steel met steel in a flurry of sparks. Haruji parried, struck, turned, and cut again. He moved not with youth's speed, but with age's precision, every motion pared down to necessity. Yet for every raider he felled, another pressed forward. He counted 5 dead already, bodies sprawled in the mud, their torches extinguished. Still, the ground shook with the weight of those who remained. A sudden cry rang out behind him. Haruji spun to see Tanabe, the steward, standing at the granary with a torch in hand. Instead of throwing it on the enemy, he cast it onto the thatched roof of a nearby hut. Flames leapt high, cutting off one of the escape lanes Haruji had marked. Rage surged through him. He shouted above the din, "Tanabe! What have you done?" The steward flinched but did not answer. He vanished into the smoke, his lantern's glow winking in and out like a will-o'-the-wisp. Haruji's heart sank. Treachery had confirmed itself. Another arrow hissed, grazing his arm. Pain lanced through him, but he clenched his jaw and pressed forward. Fear spread among the villagers as the enemy surged again, shields battering, blades flashing. Mothers cried out, pulling children deeper into the shrine, while men gritted their teeth and swung improvised weapons with desperation. The crow screamed once from the ridge, as if mocking them. The wind carried the smell of burning rice stores, thick and bitter. Takamine was beginning to choke on its own lifeblood. Haruji seized the moment to strike back. He ordered Genji and 2 others to topple barrels of water down the steps. The gush doused torches and scattered enemies in surprise. For an instant, defenders cheered, but the reprieve was brief. Another line of raiders surged, filling the gap with disciplined fury. One of them, a tall lieutenant, stormed the steps with a naginata. He swept the blade wide, striking down a farmer and nearly cleaving Yori. Haruji intercepted, parrying with all his remaining strength. The clash rang through the shrine like a bell. Sparks showered their faces. The lieutenant sneered through his mask. "Old dog," he spat. "You should have stayed in your hole." Haruji answered with silence and steel. He pivoted, redirected the naginata, and drove his blade through the gap beneath the man's arm. The lieutenant gasped, stumbled, and collapsed. A roar went up from the villagers, hope flickering like a flame refusing to die. Yet the sight of their fallen officer only enraged the raiders. Captain Kanda pointed his blade forward, and the black-sashed warriors surged as one, a wave of iron and fire. Their numbers still filled the night, 40, maybe more. Haruji felt his chest heave, his arms heavy with fatigue. But he planted his feet and raised his sword again. His voice thundered over the chaos. "Takamine still stands. If you would live, fight as if dawn itself depends on you." The villagers shouted with him, voices raw, blades trembling. Fear still lived in their eyes, but alongside it burned defiance. The night bled onward. Bodies fell, flames rose higher, and the snowmelt ran red down the steps of the shrine. And above it all, Haruji knew this was only the beginning. The shrine groaned under the weight of smoke and fear. Flames licked the beams, arrows rattled against the wood, and the cries of wounded men blended with the sobbing of children. The villagers had fought longer than anyone expected, but the strain was visible in every trembling arm and every desperate breath. Haruji stood in the center of it, his sword blackened with soot, his sleeve stained red where an arrow had grazed him. He had survived sieges before, but never one with so little wall, so few men, and so much at stake. Takamine was no fortress. It was a village of straw and sweat, and yet tonight it stood against 50. Genji staggered to his side, blood soaking his leg. "I can still fight," he growled, hatchet clutched in his hand. His eyes blazed with something between fury and terror. "You will fight," Haruji answered, steadying him with a hand. "But fight with your head, not only your arm. If we fall here, the children fall with us." Yori appeared next, her face streaked with ash. She carried no spear now, only a torch bound with resin-soaked cloth. "They come again," she said, voice low but steady. Her arms shook, yet her eyes did not. The next push came hard. Shields slammed the steps, blades flashing as the raiders tried to break the defenders' line. Haruji shouted for buckets, and the villagers doused the steps with water. The wet wood turned slick, attackers stumbled, and Yori thrust her torch into the gap. Flames roared up the shield line, scattering men in panic. The villagers cheered, the sound ragged but fierce. For a heartbeat, hope flickered, but Captain Kanda rallied his troops with a single barked order, his masked face gleaming in the firelight. "Forward! Crush them!" The black-sashed warriors surged again, this time splitting into two flanks to press the shrine from both sides. The defenders reeled. An old farmer fell with a spear in his gut. A boy barely 16 raised his hoe and was cut down in the same breath. Blood sprayed the shrine steps, mixing with ash and melted snow. "Hold!" Haruji roared, parrying a blow that rattled his arms. He cut low, drove the attacker back, and shoved his shoulder into another to buy space. His lungs burned, his vision swam, but he refused to yield. The villagers fought with desperation turned to defiance. Mothers swung torches, their faces set with grim resolve. Children old enough to carry stones hurled them down from the shrine platform, striking helmets and hands. Elder Shuin, his voice hoarse, rang the cracked bell rope again and again, each toll a cry to gods who seemed deaf. Yet even desperation needed cunning. Haruji shouted for Genji. Together they dragged barrels of millet from the granary, split them open, and spilled grain across the slope. When the next wave of raiders charged, their footing betrayed them. Warriors slipped, shields collided, and for an instant the villagers struck back with cries of vengeance. "Takamine lives!" Genji bellowed, swinging his hatchet down into a raider's helm. Blood sprayed across his chest, but his grin was savage, defiant. Still, the enemy's numbers told. More pressed forward, torches rising again, blades cutting through the smoke. Yori cried out as one slashed across her arm, but she drove her torch into his chest, fire catching on his tunic. He shrieked and fell back into his comrades. Through the chaos, Haruji's eyes found Tanabe once more. The steward slipped along the shadows of the burning huts, lantern in hand, raising it high, then lowering it again. And every time the enemy adjusted, pressing where the village was weakest. Betrayal confirmed. Haruji's jaw clenched. He wanted to cut the man down himself, but the blade before him demanded his focus. To abandon the line would doom the shrine. He swallowed his fury and fought on, vowing that before dawn, Tanabe's treachery would be repaid. Another arrow hissed. Haruji turned just in time, deflecting it with his sword. The traveler Ichiro stood frozen near the altar, the pouch still clenched in his hand. Fear etched his face, but when Haruji met his eyes, something else flickered there. Resolve, as if the weight of the dead was carving courage into him. "Then fight!" Haruji shouted, hurling him a fallen spear. Ichiro caught it clumsily, hands trembling, his stance awkward and his strikes almost harmless. Yet even that frail defiance, standing where he could have hidden, showed the villagers that he would no longer cower. The clash surged again, steel on steel, fire on wood, shouts and cries blending into a single roar. Bodies fell, torches flared, and the air grew thick with smoke. Yet amid the carnage, Haruji felt something shift. The villagers no longer fought as scattered souls. They fought as one. Desperation had forged them into defiance. But as the night wore on, Haruji knew resolve alone could not outlast numbers. He glanced toward the ridge where the crow perched again, silhouetted against the firelight. Its cry rasped once more, harsh and final. The crow was right. Takamine could not hold forever. And somewhere in the shadows, Tanabe raised his lantern once more. The shrine steps were slick with blood. Flames clawed higher into the night, painting every face in orange and shadow. Villagers gasped for breath, their weapons trembling, but still they stood. Haruji wiped the edge of his blade against his sleeve, though the steel was already blackened with soot and red. His chest heaved, but his gaze remained fixed on Tanabe. The steward thought himself hidden in the smoke, but Haruji saw the lantern in his hand, rising, lowering, rising again. Each flicker was answered by the enemy's next maneuver. Each movement betrayed another piece of Takamine. The samurai's stomach turned cold. Then, as if to confirm the fear, a fresh wedge of raiders broke through the north lane, striking precisely where the defenses were weakest. Villagers cried out, scattering to meet them, and Haruji knew with grim certainty that this precision was no accident. "Tanabe!" he thundered, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "What treachery is this?" The steward froze. For a heartbeat, guilt and fear warred across his face. Then he sneered, abacus beads rattling at his belt. "You waste rice on strangers, old fool. I trade it for survival. These men promised Takamine's grain would be spared if I guided them." The words struck harder than any arrow. Gasps rose among the defenders. Yori, bleeding from her arm, shouted, "You condemned us all!" Genji lurched forward, hatchet raised, but Haruji caught his arm. Rage alone would not cut through this moment. The truth needed to be heard. Tanabe's eyes glittered with madness and greed. "You think honor feeds children? You think Bushido fills their bellies? I secured our future, and when the stranger came, I knew the price would rise. He carries a message that clans would kill for. His life is worth more than this village." All eyes turned to Ichiro. The traveler stood trembling, spear clutched awkwardly, pouch pressed to his chest. Under the weight of so many stares, his knees buckled. Haruji stepped closer, voice hard but not unkind. "Is it true?" Speak Ichiro's lips moved without sound. Then, with a shudder, he pulled the pouch free. From within, he drew a scroll, its seal cracked and edges singed. He held it up with shaking hands. "I was a courier for the Hosokawa. This letter commands allies to betray the Miyoshi in Kyoto. If it reaches the wrong hands, the city will burn in another war. They hunt me because I carry not rice, not coin, but fire. I never meant to bring this storm to you. I sought only a road to safety, but the road has dragged death to your doors." Silence fell, even over the clash of swords. For an instant, the night seemed to pause, as though the gods themselves strained to hear. The villagers looked between the pouch, the scroll, and the faces of the men who would kill them for it. Elder Shuen whispered, "So it is not hunger they bring, but history itself." Haruji felt the weight settle on his shoulders. His single act of compassion had tied Takamine to the fate of lords and generals. Yet the choice was no longer his alone. Tanabe spat into the dirt. "Give them the courier and they will leave us. What is one man against all of us?" The answer came not from Haruji, but from Genji, bloodied and limping. He raised his hatchet high. "We are not grain to be sold. We are not cattle to be herded. If this man falls here, it will be by our hands, not theirs." A cheer rose, weak but fierce. Yori stepped beside Ichiro, spear in her good hand, eyes blazing. Even children pressed closer, clutching stones. Betrayal had been revealed, and in that revelation, defiance took root. Haruji lifted his sword, pointing it at Tanabe. "You bartered with lives as if they were numbers on your abacus. You betrayed the village you were sworn to protect. There will be no mercy for you." Tanabe's face twisted, but before he could flee, Genji's hatchet found his leg. He screamed, collapsing to the ground, lantern tumbling into the mud. The flame hissed and died. The raiders hesitated, confused without their signals. Haruji seized the moment. "Strike now! Drive them back!" The villagers surged with renewed fury. Spears thrust, torches swung, buckets of hot ash were flung into enemy eyes. The raiders reeled, momentarily thrown into disarray. For the first time, Takamine's defenders pushed them from the shrine steps, voices rising in a ragged, defiant roar. But Haruji knew it was not victory. The enemy would regroup. They still had numbers, discipline, and rage. The night was far from over. Yet betrayal had been dragged into the open, and that truth burned brighter than fire. He turned once more to Ichiro, whose hand shook as he clutched the scroll. "You brought the storm to us. Now you must stand in it. Will you?" Ichiro met his gaze, trembling, but nodded. "I will." The samurai saw fear in his eyes, but also the spark of resolve, perhaps enough to carry them through the rest of the night. Smoke curled through the broken beams of the shrine, black ribbons twisting against the moon. The raiders had been driven back for the moment, their line broken by the sudden fury of villagers who fought not for rice or huts, but for their very right to exist. Yet silence did not follow. The silence of safety never returned after blood was spilled. Instead came the silence of decision, the heavy pause in which a man's heart weighed what could not be unweighed. Haruji stood at the steps, blade dripping, breath ragged. Genji leaned against the wall, leg bandaged but still bleeding. Yori pressed a cloth to her arm, refusing to leave her post even as her lips turned pale. Elder Shuen clutched the bell rope, whispering prayers into the smoke. All eyes turned to Haruji. All waited. Tanabe groaned in the dirt where he had fallen, lantern shattered beside him. His eyes glared with venom, though pain bent his face. "Give them the courier," he rasped. "Spare yourselves." "What is honor worth if none of you live to see it?" the villagers murmured. They were weary, bruised, and afraid. Tanabe's words pressed against the fear already clawing their hearts. Haruji looked to Ichiro. The traveler clutched the scroll to his chest, knuckles white, body trembling. He had spoken the truth. He was a courier of the Hosokawa, hunted because he carried words sharper than any sword. The raiders would burn Takamine to ash to seize it. The samurai's voice carried over the hush, calm but iron-bound. "When I gave him my last rice, I bound myself to him. A man who accepts food accepts protection. If I betray that now, my life is already forfeit, whether I live or die." Elder Shuen's voice joined his, cracked with age but firm. "The gods mark the heart, not the outcome. Mercy cannot be undone without staining the soul, yet still doubt gnawed." Genji slammed his hatchet into the post with a roar. "I will not let my wife and children die for one man's secret." He turned to Haruji, eyes burning. "Will you?" The samurai met his gaze, unflinching. "I would let myself die. I would let my name be forgotten in the dust. But if we hand him over, what remains of Takamine is not worth saving." The words struck deep. Some wept, some clenched their jaws and nodded. Yori, her voice steady despite the tremor of pain, said, "If we give him up, we give up who we are." Tanabe spat blood into the dirt. "Fools! The raiders will kill you all. Honor will not fill your bellies." Haruji stepped toward him, sword gleaming with firelight. "And betrayal will not save yours." He turned to the villagers. "We stand as one. If we die as Takamine, not as cattle bartered for grain." The villagers cried out, some with tears, some with fury. In that cry, Haruji heard their choice. They would not surrender the courier. They would fight for him, and in doing so, fight for themselves. Ichiro staggered forward, bowing so low his forehead struck the blood-stained wood. "I brought ruin upon you," he whispered. "Let me bring at least one spark of salvation." "Use me as you must. I will not run." Haruji placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then stand, courier. Tonight, you are not Hosokawa's man. You are Takamine's." Before the villagers could answer, a horn sounded from beyond the burning huts. The raiders regrouped. 50 had become fewer, but their formation was sharp, their fury honed. Captain Kanda raised his half-mask toward the shrine, his black sash snapping in the wind. His voice carried like a blade through the smoke. "Hand him over, and your deaths will be swift. Refuse, and none will live to see dawn." The words hung heavy. The villagers trembled, but Haruji stepped to the edge of the steps, raising his sword. "We will not trade lives as if they are sacks of rice. Come then, if you would finish us. But know this, Takamine's ashes will choke you before the sun rises." The raiders answered with a roar. Shields locked, torches flared, their line surged forward once more. Haruji turned to his people. "This is our stand. Whatever happens next, remember, you fought not for lords, not for coin, but for the right to choose honor over fear." He lifted his blade high. The villagers raised their torches, spears, and stones. For a moment, the firelight in their eyes outshone the flames consuming their homes. And as the enemy advanced, Haruji felt the weight of choice settle into certainty. He had chosen mercy. He had chosen defiance. He had chosen to stand. The crow called once more from the ridge, harsh and final, as if even the gods bore witness. And then the shield wall struck the steps again. The shrine shook as the raiders' shield wall struck the steps again, a living hammer pounding against weary defenders. Arrows hissed through the smoke, spears thrust upward, and the villagers cried out in pain and fury. Haruji's arms ached, his lungs burned, but his voice carried above the chaos. "Hold them! Every breath you buy is another child's life." For a moment, the line held. Genji swung his hatchet like a man possessed, cutting down one raider even as another's blade raked across his side. Yori braced her wounded arm against the shaft of her spear, thrusting again and again until blood dripped from her fingers. Elder Shun rang the bell rope until it frayed, each toll a desperate plea to the gods. But the enemy pressed harder. Captain Kanda advanced with cold precision, his mask gleaming in the firelight. "Break them!" he roared. "The courier lives! Tear him from their hands." Haruji knew the line would not hold forever, and so he made his choice. "Genji! Yori, with me!" he shouted. Together they forced their way through the clash, carving a path toward the granary. Behind them, villagers screamed. But Haruji's mind was fixed. If the battle was to turn, it would not be by strength alone. It would be by striking at the root of betrayal. They found Tanabe crawling through the smoke, clutching his wounded leg, lantern still in hand. His eyes went wide at the sight of them. "No, you need me. You'll never survive without my stores, without my tally of grain." Haruji seized him by the collar, dragging him upright. "You sold us to wolves," he said, voice low and sharp. "Now you will buy us time." Before Tanabe could protest, Haruji shoved him into the open, forcing the lantern into his hand. Raiders paused, startled at the sight of the steward stumbling toward them. Haruji raised his sword high, voice carrying over the din. "Here is your traitor, the man who bartered with your captain." The raiders hesitated, their formation faltering as confusion rippled through their ranks. Some cursed, others shouted questions, their eyes flicking between Tanabe and Kanda. The steward stammered, words spilling uselessly into the smoke. It was the crack in the wall Haruji needed. "Now!" he roared. Buckets of ash, hoarded for months in the granary, were hurled into the wind. The black cloud blinded the raiders, searing their eyes and choking their lungs. Villagers surged forward with torches and spears, striking into the confusion. Genji buried his hatchet in one man's helm, Yori drove her spear through another's thigh, and Ichiro, trembling but resolute, thrust his spear into the belly of a third. The man fell gasping at the courier's feet, and for the first time, Ichiro did not recoil. The reversal was sudden and brutal. Where moments before the villagers had bent under the tide, now the tide bent under them. Cries of fear rang among the raiders as the defenders pressed, not with numbers, but with fury sharpened by betrayal. Captain Kanda bellowed to restore order, but his men stumbled in the ash. And then Haruji struck. He lunged into their disarray, blade flashing, cutting down two before the third even raised his shield. Blood sprayed across the shrine steps, and the villagers roared as if the gods themselves had joined them. Tanabe, still clutching the lantern, screamed for mercy, but none came. A raider's blade cut him down in the confusion, his body collapsing into the mud he had sold for grain. Haruji saw him fall with his own eyes and turned away, giving him no more honor than the silence he deserved. When the ash cleared, 19 of the 50 raiders lay dead. One more, half-conscious and blinded, was dragged down by villagers and bound with ropes. The rest, coughing and bleeding, staggered back toward the ridge. For the first time, the night grew still. The crackle of flames and the moans of the wounded filled the silence where battle had been. Villagers slumped to the ground, sobbing, laughing, clutching one another. They had survived another wave. Against all odds, they had bloodied 50. But Haruji did not lower his sword. He stood among the bodies, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the ridge where Captain Kanda gathered his remaining men. 30 still lived, shields raised, fury unbroken. The captain's mask glinted, his sash fluttered like a shadow in the firelight. He lifted his sword, pointing it toward the shrine. The night was not over. Haruji turned to his people, his voice calm though his body trembled. We have struck them harder than they expected. We have bled them. But they will come again. Dawn is far, and only the strong of heart will see it. Ichiro stepped forward, blood on his hands, face pale but resolute. I will fight, he said, voice shaking but steady. Not for the scroll, not for Hosokawa, for Takamine. Haruji nodded once, the weight of his choice heavy in his chest. Honor had bound him, betrayal had threatened him, and sacrifice had saved them, for now. But he knew the storm's eye was only passing. The crow screamed once from the ridge, its cry carried on the wind. The sound chilled every soul who heard it. The night still belonged to the enemy. The ridge glowed red with firelight, 30 black-sashed warriors standing like shadows carved into flame. Captain Kanda raised his sword, the lacquered mask gleaming with hate. Below, Takamine smoldered, its huts gutted, its people bloodied, but still breathing. Between the two, Haruji stood on the shrine steps, sword raised though his arms trembled, his face streaked with soot and blood. The villagers gathered behind him. Genji leaned on his hatchet, wounded but unyielding. Yori wrapped her torn sleeve tighter, bamboo spear shaking in her grip. Elder Shuen whispered prayers, each word rasping like the toll of a broken bell. Ichiro stood among them now, his spear blackened, his pouch empty save for the scroll pressed into Haruji's sash. They had chosen not to surrender him, and now dawn itself would judge if the choice was folly or faith. The enemy advanced, not with haste, not with recklessness, but with grim certainty. 30 men moved as one, their shields locked, their swords glinting. They meant to crush what remained of Takamine and salt its memory into the earth. Hold, Haruji said, voice calm as the mountain. His breath clouded in the night, steady despite the weight in his chest. This is our last stand. Let it not be said that we yielded, the villagers braced. Mothers clutched torches, children too young to flee held stones. Even the wounded lifted what weapons they could. Every heart beat with terror, yet every soul stood rooted by the bond forged in fire. The shield wall struck the steps, and the shrine quaked. Blades clashed, sparks flew, and blood sprayed once more. Genji swung his hatchet until his knees gave way. He fell with a roar, his last strike cleaving through a raider's helm. Yori, pale as ash, drove her spear into another before collapsing, still gripping the shaft as if her spirit refused to let go. Elder Shuen stood at the altar, raising the cracked bell rope one final time. His prayer rose above the screams, and in that instant, even the raiders hesitated. A blade cut him down mid-syllable, and he crumpled where he had stood, but his voice seemed to linger in the air, a ghost of faith. Haruji fought like a man already dead. His sword moved with the memory of youth, each stroke a song of defiance. He cut through one, then another, until his body cried for rest. An enemy's blade pierced his side, another slashed across his shoulder. He dropped to one knee, vision swimming. But when Captain Kanda loomed before him, mask glinting, Haruji rose once more. Their blades clashed in a storm of sparks. Kanda struck heavy, each blow rattling Haruji's bones. But the samurai's eyes burned with something deeper than strength, the refusal to yield what mercy had bound him to protect. At last, with a surge born of every soul who still breathed behind him, Haruji fainted low, then drove his blade upward beneath the captain's guard. Steel pierced flesh. Kanda gasped, staggered, and fell, mask shattering against the shrine steps. For a heartbeat, silence ruled the battlefield. Then the raiders broke. Without their captain, their line wavered. 30 turned to 20, 20 to 10, until the survivors fled into the burning fields. Dawn's first light touched their retreat, casting long shadows as they vanished into the hills. The village was left in ruin. Smoke rose from the husks of huts, mingling with the pale glow of morning. The air reeked of ash and blood. And among the wreckage, the dead lay in rows, friends, foes, neighbors alike. Haruji stood swaying, blood seeping from his wounds. Genji's body lay near the steps, his hatchet still in hand. Yori's spear jutted from the chest of the man she had slain, her fingers stiff around the shaft. Elder Shuen's bell rope lay across his chest, silent now forever. Ichiro knelt before Haruji, tears streaking his soot-stained face. "I brought this upon you," he whispered. "All this death, all this fire, it followed me." Haruji placed the scroll back into Ichiro's hands. His grip was weak, but his eyes steady. "No, it followed the world. You only carried it. What you carry now is their sacrifice. Make it reach those who must hear it, or all this was for nothing." The courier bowed until his forehead touched the blood-soaked earth. "I swear it." Haruji turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the first plum blossoms had survived the night, pale against the soot. The crow perched once more on the shrine beam, its cry ragged but alive. He exhaled slowly, letting the sword fall from his hand. His body followed, collapsing beside the broken chawan. By the time dawn touched the ruins, Haruji's eyes had closed forever. As the villagers gathered the wounded and counted the fallen, Ichiro recorded the final toll with his own trembling voice. Of the 50 who came, 19 fell here. 1 lies bound as prisoner, and 30 fled into the hills before sunrise. The words etched the truth into memory, a ledger written not with ink, but with blood. Haruji closed his eyes. The last thing he saw was the broken chawan lying in the ashes of his hut, the rice long gone, its circle complete. He had given mercy, and mercy had demanded everything in return. Yet as dawn spread across Takamine's ruins, it seemed to whisper that such mercy was not wasted, that it had carved honor out of despair and left behind a story to outlive the dead. If this tale of honor and sacrifice moved you, let your voice be heard. Leave a like to show your support, and subscribe so you never miss the next story from the shadows of Japan's past. In the comments, share your thoughts, and tell us, what score from 0 to 10 would you give this story?